Hi, welcome back. I'm Brian Caram. The other day I was hosting Mary Trump Live, and someone asked me about life in the White House. My first day in the White House, and this is how it happened. 1985, Ronald Reagan was president, and I was 24 years old. And I came to the White House. The story is I came to town for a couple of weeks, and I didn't have a hard pass at the time. I got what's called a day pass. I would call the day before, give them my information. They'd give me a day pass, and they'd escort me into the White House. The very first day I was there, the very first person I met was Helen Thomas. Helen was standing outside of the doors of the briefing room, and I introduced myself. I was a big fan of hers, and she was a mentor, whether she knew it or not, for me. And she said, "I know who you are, young man." And I was stunned that she would know who I am, but I'm of Lebanese descent. She's of Lebanese descent. She's from Kentucky, and she knew my uncle and my grandfather and said, "You're of the Karams from Louisville." And I said, "Yes, I am." And she took me in. I was impressed. But Helen knew everybody and everything. Helen was the reporter that would walk into the White House, and the press secretary would bring her, and I'm not making this up, ask Joe Lockhart from during the Clinton years. Joe would bring her a coffee and a Danish or a donut every morning, and she would sit upstairs in the upper press area where the press secretary and his closest workers would sit, and she would just watch them. And Lockhart one time said, "Why are you doing that?" And she goes, "You really are a dumb son of a bitch, aren't you?" And he said, "Okay, I'll bite." She goes, "I can sit here and watch everything going on and know what's happening before you do." She was an observer. She was a reporter. Was one of the best of us. So she brought me in. She introduced me around. I can't remember most of the people I met that day, but the one that stuck out in my mind was Sam Donaldson, who was also a mentor of mine and later became a personal mentor of mine. So Sam was there, and he said, "Brian, look." He looked at the first row of the Brady briefing room, and he said, "There are 7 seats there. There's probably a accumulation of 200 years of industrial strength knowledge and experience there. Make yourself available to all of it." Then he turned and he looked at Helen and said, "And Helen's got 190 years of it." And she turned and said something smart to Sam, and Sam said, "Hey, Helen," with a big grin on his face, "it's okay to have an unexpressed thought." And Helen said, "Hey, Sam, when it comes to you, I have a lot of unexpressed thoughts." They were fans of each other, good workers, and I had a great laugh. Didn't know what I was doing the rest of my life, but I knew at that moment, man, it was golden. So later on that afternoon, I was following them around. Sam said he followed Helen around. He goes, "Follow around the best." So I'm following him, who's following Helen and a couple other people, and they walked up to the upper press area. And at that time, Larry Speakes he was the presidential press secretary. Actually, he was the under press secretary. They never gave him the title. They gave that to James Brady. Even after he was shot, he held on to that title. But Larry Speakes was the guy that you worked with on a day-to-day basis. And so Helen's up there knocking on the door, demand, "Larry, you get out and talk to us right now. Get out here." And she's banging on the door. And if I did that today, of course, they'd throw me out of the White House. But we were standing there, and up walks a Secret Service agent. And the Secret Service agent says, "Helen, you guys have to leave. The president is coming over to talk to Larry." So she thanked him and said she'd be back, and she turned and he left. This is like my first day there. And I'm watching these people leave, and I was a little nervous. And I turned to walk down. Now, if you don't know the area, there's a kind of a slow ramp up to the upper press area. The press secretary's office used to be right there on the right, and then all these desks where the support staff worked. And so I'm at that door, and I turned to walk down that long corridor, and I tripped and I fell on my ass. And as I'm on the ground trying to pick myself up, I feel this rather large hand on my shoulder. And I'm pretty sure that it's a Secret Service agent who's going to throw me out of the White House. And as I turned around, it was President Ronald Reagan. Now, I never liked the man's policies, but he turned and he looked at me and he said, "Well, young fella, you don't have to bow in front of me." And I stood up and laughed, and he laughed, shook his hand, and I left. I didn't even ask a question. All I can tell you, that was my first day in the White House. And I learned something that day from Helen and Sam. Helen told me, and this is why my podcast is called Just Ask the Question. She said, "Brian, it doesn't matter what the question is. It doesn't matter if they answer it. Just ask the question. That way they can't deny it's been asked and it's a part of the permanent record. Her very first bits of advice to me were that. Sam also said, and I'll teach you how to yell so you can be heard, but that's another story. Anyway, that's my first day at the White House. 40 years later, I'm still going there.